By some, he's been called controversial.
I'll keep my freedom, I'll keep my guns, try to keep my money and my religion too. Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that. I'm going to keep my big V8, keep my friends the same, keep the government out of my business, and y'all can keep the change.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas.
We know what we need. We know who to blame.
Catch the Free American Hour, weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
I'll keep the USA and y'all can keep the change.
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American Hour. I'm your host, Clay Douglas. My guest today is Robert Pelton. Robert, are you with me?
I am.
Well, you know, Robert, I think this is really a significant July 4th and 2012. I mean, supposedly, according to all of the propaganda passed on to us by the mainstream media, hey, we could be facing the end of the world here on December 21st or something. Couldn't we?
Well, yeah, you could. That's been predicted for centuries, but it's never happened yet. Thank goodness we're in America.
That's right. That's right, in America. And let me share this with you. Today is July 4th, 2012. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety, happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established shall not be changed for light or transient causes, and according to all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. And when a long train of abuses and usurpations are pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To disprove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Now, Robert, you've written books on the Constitution. You've written books on the Founding Fathers, right down to their recipes, what they ate, how they thought, what they thought. And this seems pretty clear to me, and this seems something worth fighting for. That's why I took an oath to this Constitution, which follows this document. It's why I do what I do. It's not to overthrow the government, it's to reestablish the form of government that we are supposed to have, because I believe that Britain has for 200 years trying to make us a colony again, and whether they use the Rothschilds or whether they use Israel or whether they use, communism as as somebody in the chat room just said, Freemasons are certainly a part of this. They're trying to overthrow the principles of liberty and freedom that our Declaration of Independence said was ours. Are we in a war now? What is 2012? The buzz is, oh, man said it's the end of the world. Well, I hope it is. I hope it's the end of the banker's world and we can restore the productivity of America again.
Well, you're right. You're right. It's what we're fighting, and we are at war. We're fighting for reestablishment, as you said, of our constitutional republic. This is what our politicians forget. It irritates me to no end. I'm sure it does you, and perhaps some of the listeners who are knowledgeable, when politicians stand up in the halls of Congress or to the media and say, in a democracy, in our democracy. Bull. We never have had, well, we do have a democracy, but we're not supposed to. We're supposed to have a republic, a constitutional republic, which simply means a government rule of law. And what is the law? The Constitution. The Constitution is merely a set of legal guidelines that if we follow them, then the country cannot go wrong, cannot go off base. The problem is we have so many self-serving, rotten to the core politicians who are willing to sacrifice everything for their own gain, for their personal gain.
Let me see if I can make people understand. There's a hell of a difference between statesmen and politicians. And Benjamin Franklin was asked, what form of government have you wrought for us, Mr. Franklin, as he walked out of Constitution Hall. He said, a constitutional republic, ma'am, if you can keep it.
If you can keep it.
So from that day on,
knowing full well it would come under attack from other people immediately because they either didn't understand it or didn't like it. For whatever the reason, now a socialist, for example, which we have one in the White House right now, his socialist agenda, and that's exactly what it was, and I might recommend this. I don't know if you've read it, I would say you have. There's a book out called The Manchurian President. It happened to be written by a European. It took somebody from Germany, I believe it was, to write the Manchurian President, not the Manchurian Candidate now that we hear about the movie in the 50s, about the fellow that was brainwashed as a POW, came back and was elevated into the presidency. This is the Manchurian President. It's a book about Mr. Obama. And it gives all of his background, which is absolutely atrocious. And it gives his people's background that he has put into place in positions as you know, czars. We've always had people running government in different departments. Now we have a czar of Homeland Security. We have a czar of agriculture. We have czar. Where do we get this czar crap? Well, that's Soviet. Soviet Union used czars. Now, also the Soviet Union, if you'll notice, even in the movies back in the 40s, the black and whites, in World War II, the old movies, Russia will talk about their homeland. Their wonderful homeland. Well, yeah. Why are we calling America? It's never been a homeland. We're a nation of free people. We're a nation under a constitution. And the homeland is a Soviet term again. And I'm not nuts on this. Hey, look, it offends me that we have to use all of the terminology from the left to characterize our country, our own nation.
We're
a nation of law, period. A constitution which was founded by Christian let me put that in quotes, Christian men. And, hey, somebody will call in maybe and say, oh, Bull, you can't prove that. Well, hey, I don't have to prove it. How do I know that? Because they told us. They told us what they stood for. They told us what they believed in. They told us what the founding was. George Washington raised his hand in the Continental Congress. If not for George being a man of stature, the Constitution never would have been passed. They were bickering and arguing. He raised his hand and he said, hey, fellas, look, it's not perfect, but it's the best we can do right now. Let's pass it. They did. Then he raised his hand and he said, the providence of God, the providence, this is his quote, the providence of God rests on America. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean, Clay? It means that he believed that the nation was under the guidance and protection of the Almighty. Period. Now, remember this. No one can dispute this fact. It's a fact. This nation, America, was the only, underlined, capitalized only, nation in the world, in the history of the world, that was founded on biblical principles. Now, can they contest that? Absolutely not. Well, they can lie about it. They can lie, but they cannot contest it. It was the only nation ever founded on biblical principles. Now, the reason that is, and I believe this, that the country did what it did, grew from a colony, got its freedom, and grew into the most powerful nation in the world, most generous nation in the world, most wonderful nation in the world. Thank God we were born here. But look, well, some of us were. Maybe the president wasn't, but some of us were. It's just a fact of life that America was founded as a Christian nation under the providence of Washington said the hand of God, the providence of God. And so everybody else did too. Hey, when they wrote the Constitution, James Madison was one of the major penmen, and he said that this was founded for a religious people. Well, that's not a religious people, for a Christian people, for a moral people. And if we did not have and continue to have a moral people in America, a Christian people running things, then this Constitution would be null and void. It would mean nothing. And does it to the average joker in Washington today? No.
Somehow,
they haven't even read it.
Somehow, Robert, when you said that, a vision of the big sign that said Hollywood flashed in my mind.
Well, of course, that's a major propaganda machine.
Propaganda. That's exactly what and that's exactly what we're being fed on. It's called programming, and this is
have you ever seen a movie? I just watched it the other night. It's a black and white. Henry Fonda and a bunch of other people in it. It's called Failsafe. Failsafe.
Yes.
And it ends up with the President of the United States blowing up New York City because he didn't want to start a war with Russia because we had accidentally sent a bomber loaded with so many megatons of nuclear bombs over Moscow, and then when they dropped the bombs on Moscow, he made a deal with the premier of Russia to drop one on New York to show that it didn't mean anything bad. Well, hey, and what the ending of the show was, simply propaganda, was that, hey, this was the only way to avoid this total destruction of the world was to negotiate and become more and more like the Soviets. Well, I mean, hey, come on, that was the Cold War. I mean, that was the end result. All the left-wingers in Washington, D.C. and our government, and this is nothing new. Hey, you want people doubt this? Get on eBay. Get on not eBay. What do you call it? Amazon, and ask for a copy of the McCarthy Chronicles. It's a 2-book series. I wrote it. Book 1 is traitors. Book 2 is treason. About 500 pages apiece. They're like they're cheap, $19.95. Hey, look, read those books. Become aware of what has happened since Roosevelt's time up to the present day. Again, look up The Manchurian Candidate. It's on the market now. You can get on Alibris, ALIBRIS.com. Get a second-hand copy of it for half price or less. Get one, though. Read that book. That'll tell you who's running our country now. I recommend that. I mean,
let me talk about. Let's talk about this. You've written 2 books on McCarthy. McCarthy was right. As a matter of fact, I do recall one published conversation that he had with the James Forrestal.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah,
he referred to the communists as being stupid, and he said no, consistency is not the mark of stupidity. You know,
oh yeah.
if they were just
if it wasn't by design, they make a mistake now and then.
yeah, every now and then they'd make a mistake in our favor.
Exactly, but it never happened. So he made a good point. Yeah.
Now,
I have, like I say, I have what I call, I researched McCarthy very thoroughly, and that is the key word. People will say, oh, McCarthyism. Those are phrases from the left who try to get people to stay away from investigating or looking into what's going on behind the scenes, Clay. McCarthy Chronicles, Part 1 and Part 2. Read those suckers. I mean, your readers, your people, listeners should read those books. They're on Amazon. Look them up. Buy one. Read one. If you like it, read the second. I can guarantee you this. You buy the first one, you're going to get the second one. You cannot put those books down.
Now, what they did, you know, Roosevelt, I recall, said, that he didn't have anything against communism. Some of his best friends were communists.
Exactly right. That's the exact phrase he said. And Eleanor Roosevelt was, Alger Hiss was a protege of hers. I mean, she was the one who was instrumental. Well, actually, Felix Frankfurter, who was a communist, his Supreme Court Justice of the United States, appointed by Roosevelt, was later known to be, well, he knew at the time. They knew at the time he was a Red. He was uncovered and investigated, House Un-American Activities Committee, whatever. He was still appointed to the Supreme Court. Now, that has to be approved by the United States Congress. What happened? Why? How does this happen? Okay, he was the one who was instrumental in placing Alger Hiss in the State Department. Now, where did Alger Hiss end up? He worked his way up the route. He became the top man in the State Department. When the UN was formed in 1944 in San Francisco, Alger Hiss was given the job of coordinating everything at the UN conference, and he was the man who hired everyone who went into that conference to write the papers for the U.S. policy, to the direction we were going in. Everything about the UN was set up by Alger Hiss. Who was Alger Hiss? He was a Soviet agent. That's common knowledge.
Now, hasn't a Soviet general been the head of the security agency
well, sure.
since the UN started? Except for now, I believe President Obama has that honor.
Well, I mean, we're Tweedledee, Tweedledum. You know, that's all I can say. It is nothing there to protect the U.S.
One of the difficulties that I have, you know, I've been savage for 20 some odd years, here for publishing the Free American, for starting a militia, for doing this radio show, and all of the opposition has come from Jewish organizations, ADL, Southern Poverty Law, which I refer to as communist organizations. Now, they made McCarthyism a bad word because some of
what you referred to them as, you're absolutely correct. Anybody that wants to look into their background, with Morris Dees, who is head of it,
yes,
look into their background, he's become a multimillionaire, my understanding is, through government grants.
That's
How?
right.
Because he has friends in government, in the State Department, who write these grants, who work these grants for his organization. Hey, another example of this is the one that does the abortions. The abortion clinics around the United States. They have grants from the U.S. government. Constant, the biggest abortion factory in the world. Hey, they still get grants, but there's controversy now because the Congress has said, hey, we're cutting it back. Well, there's a big stink. Well, who are they? Well, they're a left-wing organization. They're promoting young girls going in without parents' consent, getting an abortion, not telling mom and daddy.
Yeah, and Israel probably give them a job as a hooker later, you know.
Well, yes.
Now,
I think that, from my understanding, is the greatest underworld, undercover slave traffic for young girls is through Israel.
Yes.
I mean, as whatever Israel may be good about it, whatever it's supposed to be, I understand the slave traffic emanates from there. It's one of the largest slave traffickers in young women.
Yeah, and if you get a nice picture, open up communications with a beautiful blonde Russian girl or something that speaks perfect English, she's probably been kidnapped from the Ukraine, and she's in Nigeria right now because there's no extradition treaty with Nigeria.
Well, of course not. Now, and even if there was, Who would apply for it? Who would enforce it? No one. I mean, come on. Look, the UN is what runs the show. Hillary Clinton, who is what? Secretary of State. Now look, she just signed a treaty with the UN on arms control. Arms control. What it means is that what they're telling us is, and have told us since the very beginning, Clay, is that the UN law overrides the U.S. Constitution. Now, it should, and it doesn't as far as I'm concerned. I can advise people this. Look, if you don't have one, get one. If you don't have something to use in it, get it. It's time to do it and set up a militia in your own community, short, small, 5 people in a group, spread them out and keep it going. Hey, we're going to need it eventually. I really believe that. And I'm not a nut about this. Look, you've been into that. You've been around that. I've been around it. I really feel like during the Y2K problem in the 1990s, late 90s, the militia was all over the U.S., growing in leaps and bounds. I think it scared the living daylights out of the political left in the United States. They backed off. Now they're in full force with the president behind them. Hey, you need a militia. It's constitutional.
It's being set up right now, even as we speak. The militias are growing again, but this time they're growing under the sheriff's department. Now, you know, they tried, Southern Poverty Law tried to demonize me for starting the militia. Well, guess what? Wasn't exactly a terrorist organization. We did it in the governor's office. The governor was in my house, came to my house. We worked for the governor.
Yeah, well, and you should, if that's possible. If it's possible, you do. Yes, you work with the sheriff's department, you work with the government. Hey, should they not be available, you work for yourself. You still do it. Just because you don't get cooperation doesn't mean it's not necessary and it's not legal. It is constitutional. We have always had militia in the United States. They can say this, oh, that's the National Guard, that's the Army, let's go. The militia is the populace armed. It's population. That's why no one's dared to attack us as a nation, because every person is armed. Not every person, you know, but I'm talking about the general household. The majority of people are hunters, or they are armed in one or more reasons. And hey, by the way, one of the greatest terrorist threats now, according to the administration in power right now in Washington, D.C., two of the greatest threats. Number one, if you're a Christian, that term, Christian, you're a terrorist threat. Number two, if you hunt, you're a terrorist threat. Number three, if you're a veteran, you are a terrorist threat. Why? Because you are assumed to know how to use weapons. Now, is that not pretty damn dangerous when you call people a terrorist threat who are good American citizens? It is.
What they have done, in my opinion, Robert, is they have refined the art of slavery to the point that the slaves don't know they're slaves. I'm not a slave, man. I can go get in my pickup and go get a beer. Watch. Yeah, how much did you just give the oil companies to get to the bar? And now they are. I think it's worse. I think the with the 21st century, there was a step taken. It was like a revolving door. Y2K didn't happen. We got into the 21st century, and they turned the heat up. They turned the heat up, just as you said, by pointing the finger at veterans, pointing the finger at anybody that was for the Constitution, anybody that started the militia. They went after Christian identity. Why did they go after Christian identity?
They went after all veterans. It's right now one of the top terrorist groups in the nation, considered to be terrorists by the administration, by the left, not just this administration, but any now, would be veterans, because they've had experience in the military. They haven't all had combat experience, but basically, now here's the thing, Clay, you mentioned this. In the Y2K movement in 1998, 1999, look, the militia grew so fast. I really, honest to God, I was involved in that. I believe that it scared the daylights out of the left in politics in America. It made them back down. Now they have regrouped, and they feel safe again because the militia's quieted down. What I tell people is, hey, look, I tell my own family, they're still out there. All the people I knew in Tennessee, they're still out there. They still have their weapons. They still have their ammunition. They're there. They're just not organized.
They're not organized.
All it would take is a phone call.
They're afraid. They're afraid. It's like if you become aware that everything that Clay Douglas and Robert Pelton have just said to you today on this show is absolutely true. We are in a war. And what I wanted to ask you here, we got a few more minutes on this segment, and then we'll switch over to another half. The everything that everybody that's came after me has been Jewish. Now, I don't believe. And I don't care what religion or what color the woman and the couple that live in the next house over. I don't care what color they are. I don't care what religion they are. The Constitution covers that. If you want to hug a tree, go ahead. If you want to beat your head against that wailing wall, knock yourself out. I'll watch.
Good guy.
You want to stick your nose in the ground and your ass up in the air? Go ahead, but I'll try to keep the St. Bernard off of you. How's that?
Yeah, fine.
And if you want to pray for a Cadillac, I'll pray that God don't drop it on top of you. But I ain't going to get down on my...
You're such a humane guy, Clay. You're such a humane guy. You just misunderstood.
That's right. And all of these people are calling me a radical, an extremist, anti-government, every name you can think. I mean, some of them even call me a communist, you know? Oh, and let's not forget, you, good morning, you Nazi son of a bitch. You know?
Well, the thing about it is you can call anybody anything you want and get away with it, freedom of speech. But, hey, look, it's just to divert your support away from you by confusing your supporters, if it can be done. If calling you a red doesn't do it, calling you a Nazi will.
God, somebody's even called me a biker. Somebody accused me of being a biker, man. I don't understand. Where's all this come from?
Well, you ever think that it might be that you own a Harley?
That could be it.
You have a biker magazine. And I know you're a biker. I mean, you took my daughters and brainwashed them by giving them a ride on a big old Harley with all the chrome on it, and they to this day are still impressed. One's 32 years old, married, and got a child, and got a grandchild from her, and you gave them a ride on your motorcycle. To this day, they remember Clay Douglas. That was the thrill of their life at that time.
Well, you know, we've kind of...
13 years old, 12, 13, 14 years old.
Yeah, wonderful
and you were nice enough
ladies.
to give them a ride, and they were thrilled.
Wonderful ladies. Now, Robert, we've been through. I'm working on my next article. You know, I'm still working on answers. I'm still working on my Liberty Village plan, and that's coming together. By the way, folks, just so you understand, Liberty Villages is happening right now in Texas in 2 different locations. You got your choice of 2 different types of structures. Actually, you got your choice of 3. We got 40 acres in one place, 15 acres in another, 30 acres in another spot, all around Austin, Texas. I think this Texan in exile is going to move back to the Austin area and run the Liberty Villages for a number of different companies. And I'm also going to be writing about it because the Liberty Villages exist right now in the small towns around America, in the backyards of upstate New York. People are taking action, doing the right thing. You know, it's almost like a Johnny Appleseed type of movement. You know, people are digging up the backyards, putting some wood chips down, and planting gardens in their backyards. I think that's the way to go. I think we've got to really restore our attitude. They have programmed us over the 20th century to be slaves, to be the warriors, to be but they also sprayed us with Agent Orange made by Monsanto in Vietnam because they didn't want combat-hardened, trained veterans coming back to this country, loyal to the Constitution, and coming to the conclusion that every plank on the Communist Manifesto was intact in America today.